Thank you everyone. Thanks for the introduction. I'm here today to talk to you about the AI settlement generation challenge in Minecraft. And basically my main takeaway is for you to look at this competition and say, wow, this is super cool, I want to participate in it, or if you want to sponsor us or collaborate with us and look at our data, hit me up afterwards. The other takeaway points here are that I want to talk a little bit about how we use this scientific competition to drive a certain bit of interest and wanted to focus on certain challenges. And since we've been doing this for 7 years, I also wanted to tell you what we learned along the way and give you a little bit of a retrospective. So let me take you back to the year 2017, right? I'm sitting in a little bodega in Brooklyn. The sun is just going down. Donald Trump has just started his first term in office. People were really into the latest AI fad, deep learning, right? It was a different time back then, right? So we're sitting there and saying, what does this world need? Another AI competition. Julian and I were looking at, what do we want to kind of achieve with this? And we were particularly interested in pushing this idea of procedural content generation, or generative design, as it's been also called back then. And we thought the two big challenges we should tackle are, on one hand, adaptivity. So the idea to not just make something on an empty level or an empty field, but make something that can react to existing content, to take some in as a context and work with this. And ultimately, our goal was to walk towards co-creativity, right? Because if you want to make something together with a human, then you might have to deal with the content they make and kind of purely based on that, continue on from there. And the other thing was we were interested in this idea of holistic design. So back then, a lot of PCG was about content orchestration. So you might have music and a map and a level, and you want all of this to fit together, or narrative and a level, right? But there you could design these things separately and maybe design one first and then design the other. But what if you design, let's say, a house, right? A house has to be functional, it has to be nice looking, maybe it should evoke this right kind of narrative to your neighbors, and it has to do all of these things at the same time in the same artifact, right? So you can't really divide and conquer and satisfy these different constraints separately, right? And the other big inspiration we were looking at back then were these kind of time lapses. So this is a group of humans together, co-creatively building a Minecraft settlement, right? And there's lots of things happening here, right? They're reacting to the landscape, they're fulfilling several criteria at once. So this is maybe aesthetically beautiful, it provides functionality, it tells a story. It all happens at the same time by different people working together. And frankly, it's something that a 14-year-old kid can do, right? So why can't an AI do that, right? With all the power and might we have to throw at it. And back then, less so now, it was a bit of like an understudied problem, right? So people were very much, or a lot more into playing games well, but maybe a little bit less into designing games with AI and figuring out, this is part of human intelligence, right? We can do this, but can we put this into artificial intelligence? So what we came up with was the Generative Design in Minecraft competition, or GDMC. And the task there is quite simple, right? We ask our participants to build an algorithm that can generate a settlement for an unseen Minecraft maps that humans like. So from the get-go, we wanted human evaluation to be the goal. And the kind of intermediate goal was to basically be as good as this as a human. And initially, we decided to work more on the maps directly, but ultimately, we wanted to work towards working together and maybe have more of an agency perspective later. But we started out with this setup, right? The participants write code and they submit it to the GDMC competition. And then we take this code and we apply to several maps that the participants hadn't seen. So we released some training maps, but the actual competition maps were newly made and are just basically standard Minecraft terrain generation at the time. And then we apply the algorithms to that. And at this stage, the algorithm can basically fully access the map, right? So we've updated the technology a little bit, but it can do whatever it wants on the map. It can see theoretically whatever it wants to see. It can query whatever block at whatever XYZ coordinate. There's a bit of an argument on if you really want to query all the coordinates of the map, because it is a lot of data that you might not actually need, right? But that's what you're working with as an interface, right? So it's basically a three-dimensional array with some extra bells and whistles that you can manipulate, right? And then we send this resulting generated settlements out to humans, and there's a bunch of like game designers, YouTubers, academics, some volunteers, and they give a score. And we asked people to score this on 4 different criteria. Adaptivity, as in how well does it adapt both on the small and large scale to the existing terrain. Functionality, as in what affordances does it provide to the player, but also to like imagined villagers. Evocative narrative is the thing that settlements tell stories, both about how they came about, but also about the people who live there. So how well does the settlement do that? And also aesthetics, which is kind of like a catch-all term for stuff looking right. And it doesn't necessarily have to look beautiful or good, but it's a bit more about avoiding the mistakes that any 14-year-old can avoid, but a computer algorithm often gets wrong, right? So, and the first takeaway message already is that people kind of dislike that grading scheme. So we kind of force that on our judges. And some judges would rather say, I just give it a thumbs up or thumbs down or what I feel like, but I don't want to go into details. And others say, I would rather have a clear checkbox list where I can like kind of clearly tick off points. This kind of wishy-washy in between is difficult, right? It is difficult for humans, and it's very difficult if you're a game designer, right? Because if we had a clear evaluation function of what is a good game, then we're all producing like, you know, blockbuster titles every turn. So all the images you see, by the way, on my slides are all generated by various participant entries over the years. So what did we actually learn? So let me take you through some of the stuff that came up over the years. First of all, I really want to shout out to our community. And I think if you ever want to run a competition, if you get like an interested community on board, it's incredibly valuable and can be incredibly powerful. So nowadays, we moved on, and from our initial map editor, we now use a custom-built HTTP interface that works as a Minecraft mod that basically creates a very well-defined API that you can interface with, built by our community members. And you can download it on GitHub. And there exist about like, I think 4, 5, or 6 different language clients that already like interface with this and give you basic functionality, and you can start building your contribution with. And it allows you to nowadays interface with Minecraft running in real time, right? So you can literally have stuff built around the player or in reaction to actions by the player taken. And on your client, you can basically do whatever you want code-wise, right? I mean, you have the whole abilities of like Python or Java or C++ on your side and make external calls. So that's been incredibly helpful, and I think allowed a lot cooler contributions over the years. We also, particularly at the beginning, noticed if you run this repeatedly, you quickly get a meta, right? Like people in the first year, they build certain things, and one idea, for example, that people identify needs. So you have a settlement generator in year 1, and people say, well, all the houses kind of look the same. Why aren't they more adapted to the environment, right? So then in year 2, somebody comes up with the idea of palette swapping materials in houses, right? You have like different trees and different biomes. So you might just say, well, we're in this biome, why don't we use the wood that's available? If we're going to another one, I swap out all the wood parts in my house. People like that. It spread. At some point, everybody was doing it, and then it became this kind of cliche where people in like year 4 or 5 say like, oh God, another palette swap like template. And the same thing is like people were building more and more templated buildings and put them down, and people were like, oh God, these templated buildings. And there were many things where, you know, these, meta cycles developed. And we did encourage code reuse, so people usually publish their code. And sometimes people use this as a starting base or even just reuse part of it. So initially, a lot of that reuse was about pathfinding, like how do you build roads that look both efficient but also nice? How do you light things? Bridge building was a big thing initially, material adaptation. Here's actually a fun example. I call it the Eduardo Hauck skyscraper. So this was a skyscraper kind of code So it generates skyscraper programmatically. And that was basically taken by several participants in later years and either reused wholesale or modified and remixed and then created a very similar but slightly different skyscraper. And so you have this like lineage of solutions in code running through the years, which was quite interesting. I'll show you a video that actually showcases some of these ideas. And this is, I think, from 2021, so kind of halfway into our 7-year run of this competition. So it will get lighter. So here as we crest over the hill, not sure, can you see the background? Oh, yeah. So here we have like one of the settlements, and there's a massive quarry in the middle, which is one of the first uses of like a massive singular landmark that kind of really ties the settlement together and gives it character. There's also a monorail, for example, and you see the Eduardo Hauck skyscraper. This isn't the original, this is already a remix. Combined with a monorail. People also really like building procedural monorails. Here you have an entry, I think, that was submitted from Japan, which leans a bit more into like Japanese influences and tries to pick up some of their cultural artifacts. This is also interesting. We do run a chronicle competition as a bonus competition, which is about creating text that fit with specific settlements. And in this scenario, people have simulated agents that live out their lives, write diaries, and when they die, they get buried with their diaries where they die, and then you can dig up their remains and read about their life story. You can also ride the monorail, and on the inside, you have like the big skyscrapers. On the outside, you actually have like tinier houses. And I put this slide in because it creates a nice mood, which is also very important for the people who are evaluating these things. They like walk through stuff, and lighting, rain, the look and feel as you walk through it can create quite a lot. So, and here you see a functioning windmill. This is unmodded Minecraft, by the way. So kudos to you if you know how that works. People have come up with all kinds of cool tricks over the years. And here's another Eduardo Hauck skyscraper and a different modular skyscraper, creating this kind of more eco flair village. There's also interior furnishing. People have developed that over the years. So here's two examples. And this is a more experimental approach that I'll actually get to later. But yeah, overall, you've got like a huge variety of like submissions. And this is just from 1 year. I think this is all 2021 of various entries that are basically like, trying to tackle the same problem from like different perspectives and try to bring different things to the table. Yeah, and here you see a city wall, one of many that we got to see over the years. So some of the things we saw over the years. Landmarks seem to be very important, and our evaluators or judges, they do create textual feedback as well. And we did actually do a bit of a study to analyze this too, and landmarks are a thing that comes up a lot, like big singular buildings that kind of tie the settlement together. And as a game designer or level designer, you might be aware of this, but one of the challenges is, how do you actually put that into code, right? Like, how do you code what a landmark is? I mean, you can, of course, have a big templated building, but there's like, how do you place it? How do you make sure, if we're doing this for 3 different maps, right? If you're placing the same massive templated building every time, people get kind of bored by it. So how do you make this fit into the environment? And it makes you think a lot about how like landmarks are, like, say, mathematically or programmatically defined, right? And one of these landmarks that got quite popular was like the idea of city walls. So one of the winning entries had a rectangular city wall. And then over the years, people have built a lot more like elaborate, round, terrain adaptive city walls with a lot more features, creating these massive modular buildings, and also sometimes really creating nice kind of atmospheres with these buildings. And the other thing that was much requested and people got more and more into it is the idea of modular buildings. So not just having a predefined building, not just having a building that has parameters like a house that can be a bit bigger in 2 dimensions, but really having a building that is maybe put together out of different turrets. Or here we have like a massive, like multi-story kind of overbuilt, nearly like a slum landscape, but also everything is connected with a star, so you can actually, everything is walkable, and you have all these nooks and crannies that are all accessible. or you have these like tightly built, walled-in cities. So all of these things were refined over the years, and people tried to certain things and implemented, certain levels of AI methodology as well in there. And then in 2022, we actually had this entry by Mike's Angels, which in many ways I see as kind of a triumph as best practice integration. So they were a relatively big team from Leiden University, and I think they just sat down, looked at everything that went well over the years and put all of that in, right? So they have the best city walls, they have great landmarks, they have great environmental storytelling, they have like fields that people liked, and so they just put all of this together, and it's a really, really, really solid thing. It's people have looked at this, and I think there's a general consensus that this feels a lot better than what's currently in the standard game. It also has a really nice atmosphere to it. It feels a bit like a Dutch colonial style, so particularly when they're setting up in the rainforest, you really feel like as if this is like this ship's landing, there's a big cathedral, there's a city wall, there's cut back jungle, there's fields, there's mines. It really feels like all of this has Dutch names, the people have Dutch names in the village, the houses are named, so it really feels like some kind of very specific evocation of that kind of imperialistic flair. And the city feels quite believable and lived in for that, right? So a lot of these things came together really well, but you might now ask also, what about these kind of more experimental and quirky approaches? And the competition has also seen a lot of those, and they've often been quite useful, right? So there is, we had like big discussions on our Discord, and the Discord of the community has, I think, about 600 members now, some of them actively participating, some try to build stuff and then decide not to submit, some are just there to chat about the various aspects of the competition. And one of the debates we had was about like real world inspiration, that then somebody came up and thought, okay, I want to build something that's a bit like Cologne walled city, which is a massive built together complex, doesn't exist anymore. And they created this kind of structure to kind of be inspired with this. We also had people make procedural games in Minecraft. So there's one entry that's basically a dungeon with like treasure, and then you can find a book that tells you what treasure you have to find and what the story of the dungeon is, and all of this procedurally generated. There's a murder mystery in one of the towns. So there is one of the villagers has a murder basement with a skeleton inside, and he regularly abducts other villagers and kills them. And you can find clues around the village to that end. And sometimes, because it's procedurally generated, you just arrive at the village and the murderer has already been caught and been put in the custom-built jail. So sometimes there is no murder mystery because it's already solved when you get there because it's procedural. There's also like people put in hedge mazes. So that was kind of well received. There is, but also more, people have tried out various algorithms over the time too. So there's been people experimenting with wave function collapse, a very popular procedural content generation algorithm. And there's also this entry, which was done by Levi Arnold, which is kind of a constraint satisfaction procedural generation for architecture. And they did actually publish about this too, several papers, I believe. And it didn't do particularly well, but it's a nice, cool idea. And I mean, kudos to people who put themselves out there, because I think if you're a scientist and you're having this AI algorithm that you've developed, it's really, really hard to apply this to a competition that wasn't built for you, right? It's a lot easier to say, oh, I've made my own kind of mini world or challenge, and my algorithm is super amazing for it, right? And if you're a bit bigger, you can run a whole competition just for your algorithm, right? We're very agnostic towards the solutions. And one of the things I keep telling on people, and we've realized more over the years, is that GDMC offers quite a level playing field. So over the years, people have made hard-coded solutions. We've seen genetic algorithms. We've seen MCTS. We've seen templated stuff. We've seen this kind of constraint satisfaction. You can bring all of this to the table and mix and match it. And a lot of times, the scientific approaches don't really do so well, because on one hand, you often have like one postdoc who has very little time and has this very specific idea they want to do. And on the other hand, you have a team of like 5 students or even high schoolers who have a bit more time, and they're willing to kind of just do a lot more polish and a lot more willing to kind of put in extra stuff to make their idea work. One of the things that keeps on happening is that actually GANs and machine learning is quite hard in it and so far don't work. So I've actually, if you are interested in this, we've actually written a paper about that recently, where we tried GANs pretty much on the serious like state of the art that there is today with infinite like generated samples, and you can't even really recreate like a settlement generator. Even so, if you use one of the settlement generators, create infinitely many samples, you can't really get that vox to vox, which is basically 3D pix to pix to work. It's difficult. And here again, great for people putting that stuff out there and, you know, punting on this, but it's tricky. And yeah, here's a way of, for example, city generation with GAN, right? You start with a map, you do this, and then you end up with something like this. What is quite successful now is this kind of idea of agent-based simulation. So more and more over the years, people have made like simulators that have agents actually moving around, taking the actual resources, trying to build houses where they are and where it makes sense. And they've seen much success over the years. And in fact, this year's winner is this entry, which actually used the data packs that you can put in a regular unmodded Minecraft world. So normally people only see the result of the settlement building, but data packs technically allow you to put a lot more into a map. So their custom built algorithm recorded their villagers building, and when the judges first entered the area, they would literally start at that point to set up the village. So you have a bunch of like settlers. Oh, it stopped running out. Let me just play this again. You have a bunch of settlers kind of running out, chopping down trees, storing the wood somewhere, storing the stone somewhere, building a quarry, actually building the houses from the gathered materials. And that gives it a lot more narrative, a lot more believability, and there's a lot of cool stuff happening. And I think it's also really nice in the sense that one of our hopes was to eventually get back more to this kind of agent-based simulation. And I'm kind of hoping that maybe this will set us on a track also to you know, eventually meet in the middle with what I sometimes refer to as like the other Minecraft competition, where people use like deep learning to play Minecraft well. Because ultimately it might be nice if you could use something like deep learning to play Minecraft well and then ultimately work together as an embodied agent with a human. So where are we going? There is this adaptation towards existing content, so working towards co-creativity. We have what we've tried there so far is actually put existing content in the game and see how people react to it, or the generators react to it, but that's very, very difficult and still an open challenge. And then there's this integrating of narrative and making it meaningful. So over the years, we've run this Chronicle challenge, which is about making text that fits into specific settlements. And keep in mind, we're usually using 3 maps. So you have to make like 3 tourist guides or cookbooks or town chronicles, but they have to be specific for the one settlement and not the other. So we usually say the test is, could I switch them? And you wouldn't even notice. So there shouldn't be horoscopes. And I think with the rise of LLMs, there's a lot more chance to get this to a better quality level, but it's still hard. And the hardest challenge of all is probably, I mean, ultimately, you're doing this to generate a human experience. And that is incredibly hard to predict. For example, here, if you have a random YouTuber, I mean, Tommy is a good sport and reviews this competition once in a while. You basically want to make Tommy happy, right? That's the goal of all of us here. And how do you do that, right? How do you invoke the right emotions in Tommy Thompson or any other person, right, who brings a lot to the table themselves? And I think that is, it's a challenge for game design, and it's also a challenge for content generation, right? So here's the bottom line. If all of this sounds interesting and you want to participate yourself, or you have students that want to participate, I mean, you can scan this QR code, or there's various ways to reach us. We have a nice wiki where you can review past competitions, watch a lot of videos, get the code. You can join our Discord. The link is also on the wiki, where you can basically talk to a lot of our participants. They love to chat. We have like academic channels. We have game design channels. There's lots of stuff going on. So please feel free to drop by and join us. If you want to chat more about this, I'll be around. As I said, if you want to, we also have lots of data that we've done science on, or if, as I said, we're also looking for sponsors if you're interested in this kind of thing. hit me up or hit any of our other organizers up. I also like to thank them. You can also find their full names on the webpage. So thank you very much, and that's all for me.